Meki was taking call.
Oh, I see. In that case, I will call the Honourable Member Moana Meki.
Thank you, Mr Chair. And part two of this bill is in relation to amendments to the Conservation Act. And had I been able to take further calls to speak to my SOPs on part one, I would have addressed some of these issues as well, which is the dilution of the powers of the Minister of Conservation, and what a significant change this is. And I'd like to say, there are some aspects of part two of this bill that we agree with in terms of the automatic addition of new reserve land into Schedule 4. Agree, that's a good change. That's appropriate. We welcome that change. But unfortunately, as we see right throughout this piece of legislation, wherever we get an advancement or an improvement, it's double whammied against it with something that's so bad that we can't support the improvement. And that's a real disappointment, because there was a real opportunity here to yes, streamline and modernise a piece of legislation that is important for our economy and our environment. And that has unfortunately not occurred. And what we have is, as my colleague Damien O'Connor said in the debate on part one of this bill, what we've really done is created this false idea that somehow this is going to assist industry by skewing things so far towards them that they're not going to have to face the same level of hurdles that they face under the existing legislation. Well, the reality is the existing Crown Minerals Act has worked just fine. We've had mining activities go ahead on the West Coast and Taranaki. We've heard about how great it is Taranaki. Well, that all occurred under the existing legislation. It wasn't too difficult or too tricky or too burdensome for industry to be able to go ahead under the Crown Minerals Act as it stands. So instead what we've done is we've made the bill so skewed in favour of industry and away from protecting our conservation values that we're going to have people far more concerned, because if you get the process right, then the overwhelming majority of people are happy to let it play out. Yep. If they trust the process, if they trust that the protection of conservation land is going to be paramount, that the Minister of Conservation is going to be able to exercise his or her powers as the custodian of that conservation estate to ensure that it's protected for the enjoyment of all New Zealanders. And if you have a process in place that adequately addresses the environmental concerns and the health and safety concerns that come up in the mining industry, then most people would say, well, let that process go ahead. And if a mining activity is then consented, good. And if that process says no, in fact, the risks are too great, or we don't believe that the risks around the environmental health and safety, etc., have been adequately addressed, it's not going to go ahead, then that's fair enough as well. And industry accepts that. And that's the position we have now with the current Crown Minerals Act. So when government comes in here and rips the guts out of this legislation, rips the guts out of the RMA, passes a piece of exclusive economic zone legislation that is appallingly inadequate, they're not helping industry at all, because the public no longer trust the process. And when they don't trust the process, they're going to want to have more input into it. They're going to want to have more scrutiny. That's right, they don't trust the government either. They're going to be more likely to appeal and to try and get that fair process through the rights of appeal than they would otherwise. They're going to protest, they're going to complain, because they no longer trust that the process Parliament has put in place is going to adequately address the very real concerns. So this isn't helping industry at all. In fact, it's a false economy. And when you look at the shared decision-making power between the Minister of Conservation and the Minister of Energy, I have never seen an area more ripe for judicial review than giving the Minister of Energy half the say in decisions on conservation land. When the Minister of Energy stands up in this House and does a merry dance about Bathurst and about Denniston, and then gives himself overwhelming powers to make decisions on dock land, including around Bathurst, and then tries to tell us that that's not going to open the government up to judicial review, that is la-la land stuff. And if industry thinks that that's going to help them, I think they are going to be sorely disappointed. Best thing we can do for industry, the best thing we can do for environmental groups, for the public, is to get a process in place that addresses those concerns that the public have faith in, so that they know that when they go through that process, and part of that process has to be public input and right of appeal. Part of that process has to be that. And as we've seen with the RMA, most consents we don't have any problems with. Yes, there are going to be some where there are concerns, but usually and often that's around the way the government has handled things, and the way the government has handled the Denniston issue has been appallingly bad, promising things that they then didn't deliver on. And it has been that project that has been used as a test case because of those disappointments. Mr Chair. Mr Chair.
I call the Honourable Member Moana Mackie.
Thank you, Mr Chair. And it has been because of the way the government has handled these issues and these processes that has led to overwhelming public concerns, and that Denniston issue basically been used as an example of bad process and bad interference by government, bad promises being made that weren't upheld. So I very, very strongly believe, Mr Chair, that in these changes that we're making and changes that we're making under the Conservation Act, these are not going to help industry in the way that government thinks they're going to. They're going to undermine environmental values, undermine health and safety values, and I have to say here again, we do support the SOP on Pike River. Again, that SOP was allowed to go to Select Committee. So we were, and some more submissions were called for. That's the correct and proper process when you introduce a significant SOP, and we thank the government for allowing the Select Committee to consider that SOP and not doing what they did with the previous SOP 205 and just dumping it on the House beforehand.
I'm sorry to interrupt the Honourable Member. The time has come for me to report progress.
The House is resumed. Mr Chairman.
Mr Speaker, the committee has considered the Crown Minerals Permitting and Crown Land Bill and reports progress. The committee has further considered the Local Electoral Amendment Bill No. 2 and reports no progress. The committee has further considered the Airport's Cost Recovery for Processing of International Travellers Bill and reports no progress. Mr Speaker, I move that the report be adopted.
The question is that the report be adopted. Those of that opinion will say aye. Aye. Contrary, no. The ayes have it. These bills are all set down for further consideration next sitting day, and the House will stand adjourned until 2 p.m. tomorrow. Good evening, everybody.